Ah, criminals. We have an obsession with them. From cowboys to bank robbers, bad guys have become a fundamental part of the American culture, and we've been making movies about them ever since we invented the medium. It should be no surprise then that they've given us some of the most entertaining and iconic films we've ever seen. But from The Godfather to The Sopranos, they all had to start somewhere. The Public Enemy is a 1931 pre-code crime film and has the distinction of arguably being the first real gangster movie ever made. So grab your fedoras and Tommy guns, because we're going to see where the gangster genre got its start. This is The Public Enemy. The movie follows a young Irish hoodlum named Tom Powers. Along with his childhood friend, Matt Doyle, they engage in petty theft, selling their loot to a cheap swindler named Putty Nose. Putty persuades them to join his crew in robbing a fur coat warehouse, assuring them that he will protect them if things go wrong. However, during the robbery, Tom accidentally shoots a stuffed bear and alerts the police. One of his friends is killed in the shootout. Tom and Matt go to Putty for the protection he promised, but find that he's left town without them. Meanwhile, as World War I breaks out, Tom's straight-laced older brother Mike enlists in the Marines. Before he leaves, he tries to convince Tom to give up his life of crime, but his words fall on deaf ears. When Prohibition goes into effect, Tom and Matt go to work for a bootlegger named Paddy Ryan, forcing local businesses to buy their beer with the threat of violence. Ryan allies with noted gangster Nails Nathan, and with his muscle, their bootlegging business thrives. Tom and Matt become very wealthy from their illegal activities. Tom tells his mother that his money comes from politics, but when Mike returns from the war, he finds out just how far Tom has fallen in with the bootleggers. Tom tries to give his mother money, but Mike rejects the gift, and tells him that he isn't welcome in their house anymore. Meanwhile, Tom and Matt get girlfriends, Kitty and Mammy. Though Matt and Mammy are in love, Tom grows bored with Kitty, and dumps her for Gwen Allen, a beautiful woman with a weakness for dangerous men. At a restaurant for Matt and Mammy's wedding reception, they recognize Putty Nose and follow him home. Though Putty begs for his life, Tom coldly shoots him in the back to Matt's horror. Nails Nathan dies in a horse riding accident, and with his gang in disarray, a rival gang led by schemer Burns launch a war to take their business. Tom and Matt are forced to go into hiding. Burns tracks them down, and Matt is gunned down in the street. Tom is barely able to escape, and takes it upon himself to get revenge. He single-handedly shoots many of the gangsters, but is seriously wounded in the fight. In the hospital, he reconciles with Mike and his family, and agrees to change his ways. However, before he can, he's kidnapped from the hospital by the rival mob. As the movie ends, his family open the door to find Tom returned to them, dead by the mob's hands. I mentioned before that this film is arguably the original gangster movie. There were a few others that debuted before that same year, such as Little Caesar and City Streets. And if we want to go back even far enough, we can look at silent films like The Great Train Robbery. Slight aside, did you know that the final shot from that short film is the inspiration for the final shot from Goodfellas? See, movie history is fun. But I would argue that The Public Enemy had the greatest and most immediate impact on the genre, which is why it's still remembered to this day. One of the cool things about watching this film today is that you get to see how the crime genre was invented. This movie begins some traditions that will become a staple of the genre to follow. We have the rebel who won't follow society's rules. We have the idea of the mob as a surrogate family. We have the beautiful dame with a weakness for bad men. And we have the theme that would get established, that in the end, our criminal protagonist would be destroyed by his own immoral ways. It's easy to see how this pattern plays out and evolves in future movies. Tony Montana is Tom Powers. So is Henry Hill. Michael Corleone rejects family in the end. Hell, even Tony Soprano suffers from the same personality traits as Tom, which is probably why he loves this movie so much.
Public Enemy. It's a great movie.
For a class, just finished.
But The Public Enemy isn't just an interesting assignment for spoiled film students. The movie stands on its own.
You a film buff? People say Hawks invented the genre with Scarface, but Cagney was modernity. Muni was not, so I give the nod to William Wellman.
One thing the film does well is its characterization of Tom. Right from the get-go, we understand that he's a rebellious spirit. It's clear that he'll be drawn into a life of crime, even when he's a child tripping his friend's sister for no reason.
Well, he's in jail, Annie. They don't put people there for nothing.
Everybody who belongs there ain't there. That's where you'll be someday, Tom Powers.
Well, I ain't there yet. If I do go, it won't be for swiping pigeons.
But the movie also subtly hints at his deeper psychological problems. For one thing, he's shown almost to never say thank you or shake hands. Instead, he prefers to casually punch people as a greeting, even his own mother. It suggests just how antisocial Tom really is. This is also great foreshadowing to the end of the film. Patty Ryan advises the boys that no one can survive on their own.
Why do you want to front for us? We ain't never done nothing for you.
Maybe not. I may need a friend myself sometime. I'm older than you, and I've learned that nobody can do much without somebody else. Remember this, boys. You gotta have friends.
However, Tom is always saying he's alone, even when he has Matt by his side.
Are you alone?
I'm always alone when I'm with Matt.
Are you looking for a sack on the button?
He pushes people away, most importantly his brother. When Mike tries to talk to him out of concern, Tom takes it as an insult, and it leads to a physical confrontation. In the end, this lack of a connection with others is the reason he doesn't survive. However, despite this movie setting up the paradigms of the genre, it definitely didn't perfect them. Several things are brought up that don't go anywhere. When they introduce Gwen as this girl with a weakness for bad men, I expected from my experience with other films for her to be this femme fatale type. Maybe she would lead Tom to ruin, either deliberately or indirectly. But instead she's just brought up and then forgotten at the climax, ultimately making her irrelevant to the story. This isn't the only instance of this. Matt's death is tragic, as we did grow to like him over the course of the movie, but we aren't given any time for Tom's reaction to his best friend's death. Instead, he just jumps straight into the next plot point, with no real character development. And speaking of character, what about Matt's sister Molly? She has no visible reaction to her brother's death in the final scenes, almost as if the connection between the characters was a forgotten detail, which might not be so far from the truth. You might have noticed that the child actor who plays Tom looks more like Matt, and vice versa. Well, that was because Edward Woods, who plays the adult Matt, was originally cast as Tom until the director decided that James Cagney would make for a better lead. This choice skyrocketed Cagney's career, to the point where Orson Welles called him maybe the greatest actor who ever appeared in front of a camera. Another detail I found mediocre was the ending tag. It reads like a morality play, and instead of letting the viewer form their own opinion on the character, it tries to tell you what you should have thought about the events. Though this was from the pre-code era, maybe the director was forced to put it in to appease Warner Brothers or something. Who knows? I can forgive a lot of these mistakes as the movie being early in the history of cinema. After all, talkies had only been invented for around 4 or 5 years earlier, and they were still figuring things out. The scene where the Burns gang shoots at Tom and he narrowly dodges the bullets? Well, those were real bullets, being shot at Cagney's head. Special effects were in their infancy, and this was the only way they had to film a gun being fired. So don't expect the incredible shot composition and angles that would follow in the later noir films. Another thing they hadn't perfected yet was play fighting. When Mike punches Tom in the kitchen, he actually hit him so hard that he ended up cracking one of Cagney's teeth. Miraculously, Cagney stayed in character, and you can really see the pain and anger in his eyes in that shot. It speaks to just what an incredible actor he really was. One other thing I have to talk about is the infamous Grapefruit Scene. When Tom's girlfriend Kitty is complaining to him, he angrily shoves a grapefruit in her face. It was added by the director William Wellman, who would often get into fights with his wife and fantasize about doing just that. Well, he wasn't the only one apparently, because the actress's ex-husband supposedly had the scene timed and would go to the movie multiple times a day just to see the grapefruit scene. Apparently, Tony wasn't the only one who found it amusing.
I wish you was a wishing well, so that I could tie a bucket to you and sink you.
Maybe you found someone you like better.
I could go on and on about the little details from this film, and to be honest, I'd probably enjoy that, but I'll leave it on this note. One of the reasons to learn about these old films is to better be able to appreciate the modern ones we enjoy. Whether it's learning small, trivial details to bore your friends with when they're just trying to watch a movie, or appreciating how your favorite film is taking older elements and adapting them for modern use, there's a lot of great things that can be found in the past. As always, if you mooks liked the review, leave a comment. And if you didn't,